Hello my amazing people, and welcome back to my channel. If you're back, if you're new, welcome to my channel. I'm Shayna and I have another case for you all today. Today's case was recommended to me by one of my subscribers named C. She slid into my DMs on Instagram. Don't forget, if you do have any case recommendations for me, I take them from my Instagram page. If you do have any cases that you want me to look into, go hit me up. You can find me at sunnyshay.v. Following is not required, but that is where I take all case recommendations. When I saw that she had sent me this case, I was perplexed. I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard of it. It actually is very recent. Today I'll be talking to you about the case of Brent Mack. And just my usual disclaimer, this is all information that I found online and compiled into a video for educational purposes. Thank you so much for joining me today, and let's get started. Brent Daryl Mack was born on October 16th, 1970 and grew up in Guthrie, Oklahoma. He has a brother named Troy, and he also had 3 children and grandchildren as well. He had been in a relationship with a woman from Texas for about 4 months at the time that this case took place, and he really was loved dearly by everyone who knew him. He was close to his brother from the time that they were little, and even during times when they didn't live close to one another, Brent would always make efforts to stay in communication and send birthday cards and make sure that his brother knew that he loved him and was always there for him. When they were young, they rode bikes together and just did things that boys would normally do. And as they grew up over the years, Brent was always so proud of Troy. Troy became captain of the Tulsa Fire Department, which was in many ways, as you can imagine, a difficult job. And Brent will always say to him, quote, "Don't be no hero," end quote, which was something that Troy often needed to hear because he was in a role where he had to make tough decisions, and he was just in difficult to deal with situations quite often, and Brent was always there for his brother to give him advice, and he just really was so proud of him. Brent really loved everyone, and everyone around him loved him equally as much. Brent had great relationships with his children as well and really loved and enjoyed being a grandfather. He stayed in consistent communication with his family. He would often make calls and send text messages, and he was just a really supportive and loving person in the family. And the love extended outside of his immediate family because Brent had many cousins and he was an uncle to many, so his family was huge and it was always a good time. Brent had been working as an installer for a septic tank company for about 3 years at the time that this case took place, and he was good at what he did. He was a hard worker, he never complained, and he showed up and he got the job done. He did have a bit of a head-butting kind of relationship with his immediate supervisor, but aside from that, if there was any work to be done, Brent was going to be there, he was going to be on time, and he was going to get the job done and go home, no issues. Brent's immediate supervisor was a man named Dan Triplett, who was well known in the community. He was actually a city councilman in the past, and like I said, they kind of had this love-hate relationship with one another, but regardless, Brent didn't let that get in the way of his work. September 20th of this year, 2021, was a normal day for Brent. He woke up, he sent some text messages and had a phone call with his girlfriend, and he was just planning to go to work and come back home and have his normal routine for the day. He let his girlfriend know, look, I'm waiting to get picked up to go to a job site, and he was planning to go with Dan to a home in Oklahoma that needed a septic tank installed. Once Dan and Brent got out to the job site, Brent realized that he wasn't going to have good enough service to stay in communication with his girlfriend while he was up there, so he texted her, said, "Okay babe, call you later," just before 1 p.m. Since Brent was the type of person to stay in consistent communication with everyone, his daughter, who was named Rachel Wilson, became concerned when she couldn't get him by call or by text the 20th or the 21st. Some time was passing, and she was like, okay, this isn't like my father to not be in communication with me, and she wanted to look into where he could possibly be. Rachel actually knew who her father's supervisor was, so she reached out to Dan on Facebook, and she was relieved when he messaged her back after she asked him, "Do you know where my dad is, because I haven't heard from him. And Dan replied, he said, last I talked to him was on September 20th. I actually fired him, but I gave him $1,000 in severance pay, and I dropped him off at the Holiday Laundromat. And that's the last that I have had any communication with your father. And Rachel said, okay, thanks for responding. She took a screenshot of the messages because at this point she still hadn't heard back from her dad, and she knew that she probably should think about going to the police to file a missing persons report. Rachel did decide to do just that on September 28th, so about 8 days after Brent was last heard from. And one of the first things that the police did was reach out to Dan because Rachel had shown the police the Facebook messages that she exchanged with Dan. He pretty much told them the same exact thing that he said to Rachel, basically verbatim, that he had fired Brent, gave him $1,000, and that was the last he had heard from him. He also included, though, that the reason that he fired Brent was due to violent behavior, and he added that Brent had left with a green duffel bag and that he had told him that he was going off to Texas to marry his girlfriend. Don't know why, after being fired, Brent would then tell his supervisor that he's gonna go to Texas to get married, but according to Dan, that is what happened. So with this information, police decided to contact Brent's girlfriend in Texas to see if he had made it. And her name is LaShawn. And when police contacted her, she was totally confused, and she says, I haven't heard from my boyfriend since the 20th. I know as much as you know. This is coming as a shock to me. He's not okay. What's going on? And the police at this point were like, okay, so clearly he didn't come to be with his girlfriend, so he must have stayed up in the Guthrie area. So where could he have gone? Brent's daughter Rachel did have access to his cell phone records, and she decided to access them just to see if maybe for some reason he wasn't communicating with his girlfriend and his family, but had been in communication with someone else, just looking for any sign that he was safe. And she realized that there was absolutely nothing. It was radio silent and no communication back and forth on her father's cell phone after that last text message that he sent to his girlfriend on September 20th. So police could tell that something was definitely fishy here. They could tell that something was definitely amiss. Everybody kind of felt like Dan Triplett knew more than he was letting on, because when Rachel actually went back to look at the Facebook message that he had sent her, she realized that he unsent all of the messages. So it was just looking like he was trying to cover his tracks, or like he was spicing the story to kind of make people look in the wrong place. People just weren't feeling good about Dan, and the police knew that they had to look into it further. They did a really great job of taking the case seriously from the beginning, which is an amazing thing to see. They really put all forces, all hands on deck in Brent's case, which was a relief to the family to know that they were at least helping. But the family felt just this heartbreak and this anticipation and this uneasiness for the time that Brent was missing. They had no idea. They had no way of contacting him, and he had quite a large family. Everybody was able to come together in a large group effort, spread awareness, do searches, put up flyers. The family also came together and made a $6,000 reward fund for anyone who could provide them information about Brent's whereabouts. A really important piece of information that Dan told the police was that he dropped Brent off at the Holiday Laundromat in Guthrie. Police wanted to corroborate this. They wanted to at least go back to this incident to see where maybe Brent had gone after that point, at what direction he headed, if he went in someone's house, if he stayed at the laundromat. They wanted to see what was going on. So they made their way down to the Holiday Laundromat, got their hands on the CCTV footage, and were able to pull up September 20th. So they were off to a good start. They see Dan's truck drive by the laundromat, but they're confused because that's all they see. They see Dan's truck drive by the laundromat. There's no sign of Brent in the vehicle. Brent doesn't get out of the vehicle. It's literally just Dan driving by, and that's it. While in the area of the laundromat, police make contact with a woman who lives really just right up the road from the laundromat. And she says that the only odd thing that she noticed in the last couple of days was that she had this duffel bag in her backyard that looked like someone had just thrown it over the short fence that she had that kept her backyard fenced in. And she said she noticed it on the 20th, but she didn't pay much attention to it. And then she noticed it again 2 days later, and she decided at that point, okay, let me just go take a look at what this bag is. It turns out that this was Brent's work bag that Dan said that Brent was seen getting out of his truck holding. So with the camera footage showing that Brent was not in the truck of Dan and the duffel bag being in this random backyard near the laundromat, it was starting to look like Dan was trying to cover it up, that he had disposed of the bag in the backyard, but nobody knew why at this point. Like I told you guys, Dan's relationship with Brent was professional in nature. They were working together for years. It was kind of a far-fetched idea in everyone's mind. No one would really think of Dan as the type of person, upon first impression, to do anything to anyone else. So a lot of people were in this mental battle of, okay, well, something doesn't look right here, but why would he? Like, why should we even suspect him? But as the dominoes started to fall, things just didn't seem right about Dan's story. So since they couldn't corroborate his story on the cameras, what they did want to do is actually go back and get their hands on the scene of where Brent and Dan were actually physically installing the septic tank that day on September 20th. So they asked Dan for this address, and Dan said, no problem. We were at this job site in Crescent, Oklahoma. So with this address, police make their way down to the location, and they can see that it looks like there was recently some sort of construction work or installation work. And their main goal was to get in contact with the property owner to see what date Brent and Dan were there. They wanted to confirm with the landowner that Dan's story matched up. And the property owner said, okay, yeah, no, we definitely had work done. I don't know the exact details. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but I'll provide it to you at a later time. And the police were disappointed because they wanted it at that moment. You don't want to let the chance pass you by. But they said, okay, just contact us when you are able to provide us the information as soon as you can, and they provided him with a phone number. On September 30th, police received a text message from the property owner basically saying that he could confirm that Dan's company was the company to come out and do the installation of the septic tank, and also that it had been started on the 7th of September and completed on the 8th of September. And he had text messages to confirm this from Dan himself, stating that it was a 2-day job between the 7th and the 8th. Police were obviously catching him in a lie here and realizing that the work that he said he did on September 20th was actually completed 2 weeks prior. Police knew that Dan was trying to hide the actual job site location that he and Brent had worked at on September 20th. So they decided that it was best to just confront him in person. And they brought him in for official questioning on October 13th. So police started this questioning with the same question. Are you sure that the location that you and Brent worked at was the location in Crescent that you provided us before? And he was adamant. Dan was gung-ho, like absolutely for sure. And the police were giving him just enough rope to pull himself up. And he was not. He was basically saying, that is where we were, no questions asked. So police said, okay, no problem. Can you do us a favor and provide us your work records? You are an established business, so you, of course, have some sort of records, bookkeeping of all of your jobs that you do, right? And Dan is like, well, I mean, we have books and records of everything, but I don't know where they are because my wife is in charge of all of that. And the police let him have his little confident moments and think that he was getting over on them. And they finally said to him, look, we know you're lying. There are inconsistencies in your story. We have the proof that you were never at the laundromat with Brent that day. And you need to just come clean and tell us what's going on. And Dan did not give up any more information, but he became very visibly upset. His face turned bright red. He was angry. He was infuriated that they were questioning him, but they really didn't have enough to hold him, so they had no choice but to let him leave at that point, even though he was basically the main person of interest in the case. There was pretty much no other lead to follow up on, and all roads were leading back to Dan. But they didn't want to take the risk of basically detaining him before they got as much evidence as they possibly could against him, so they did let him go home. Luckily, the very next day, police obtained a warrant to search Dan's property, and not just his home, every inch, every crack, and every crevice of his property. Any barns that he may have had outside of the house, any vehicles that were on the property, basically everything that belonged to him, they were able to search. And their main goal was to find something that could confirm the location of the job site that they actually were at on September 20th, since the location that Dan was providing them was clearly BS. And the little story that he was telling them about not knowing where his records were was complete nonsense. The type of work that Dan actually did required him to report to the Department of Environmental Quality. So he had to keep very specific records. He had to make sure everything was on paper and official. There's no way that he would have just had no clue, oh, where are my records? My wife must have them. It wasn't a situation that was possible. So police went in there, they had their eye on a specific target, and they knew what they were looking for, and they actually found exactly what they were looking for in Dan's truck. Police found a complete log of all of the job sites that Dan and Brent had been to, including names, addresses, everything down to the specific job they were doing, and they were able to confirm exactly where Dan and Brent were on September 20th. This project was at a location in Mulhall, Oklahoma, as opposed to the location in Crescent that Dan told the police that they were at. And of course, the police make their way to this location in Mulhall to confirm with the property owners that Dan and Brent had been there. And when they make their way down there, the actual property owner wasn't there, but she gave the police permission by telephone to go onto the property and speak to who was there, which was her brother. And her brother pretty much told the police that all he could say for certain was that there was only one person who was on the job site when his sister provided payment to the worker. He didn't see a second person. He wasn't sure of any other person being there aside from Dan himself. Police were able to discover that there were actually cameras near the entrance to the job site, and they can see that both Dan and Brent do in fact arrive on the job site on September 20th. However, only Dan is seen leaving the job site by himself, no sign of Brent. But they were also able to get CCTV footage that the property owner had on all of their property, which was exactly what the police needed. And when they got their hands on this, they knew that this was going to paint a picture of whatever went down that day. They were able to see that Dan and Brent arrived on the site. They were unloading pipes from their truck. They were going in and out of the hole where the actual septic tank was being installed. They were doing different drillings and things. I have no idea how this actually works, but essentially the two of them were working pretty diligently from the second that they arrived on the site. And the two of them were doing equal amounts of work. They were both on their feet the whole time, except for about a 20-minute break that they both took. Everything seemed to be fine. There were no arguments. There was no altercation. There didn't seem to be any tension between the two men while on the camera. But the last time that Brent is seen on the footage, he lowered himself down into the hole where the septic tank was supposed to be installed, and he is never seen coming back out again. So police know that this is where they have to put all of their energy now to search this location, because unfortunately they had a feeling that Brent was still on this job site. So on October 21st, a very large team goes back out to dig up the area around the septic tank. They take all of the dirt off the top of it and 3 sides of it so that they have a pretty decent view of it, and then they remove the septic tank from the ground. After that, they take a probe and lower it down into the dirt beneath where the septic tank was installed. And whoever was lowering this probe into the ground said that he felt like there was something buried under the dirt, because there was this change in texture from the dirt that he was putting the probe in through. And when they actually removed the probe from the ground, they said that the smell of decomposition was very evident on the end of the probe. So they continued to dig, but they decided to use buckets and small scoopers so that way whatever was underneath the dirt wouldn't be disturbed. And as they make their way further and further down, they do discover the remains of a person who is confirmed to be Brent Mack. And they confirmed that this was him because he still had on his work boots, his work gloves, and he also had his wallet in his pocket with his identification. The following day, the medical examiner let police know that he had a projectile in his chest and an entry wound in his upper back. So he didn't see it coming. He would have been completely taken by surprise by this gunshot that came from Dan. Dan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and desecration of a human corpse. And since his arrest, he actually has been released on a $500,000 bond, which has, as you can imagine, infuriated and worried the family of Brent to no end. It's actually very rare to see anyone who is facing first-degree charges ever be released on bond, but it actually did happen in this case. And part of what has a lot of people scratching their heads is that the judge who determined that Dan could be released on bond actually determined that 3 other people who are currently in custody facing the same charge could not receive release on bond. So it's concerning to some people that this treatment was being given to Dan, and in the proceedings, his lawyers requested leniency due to his great history and being an upstanding citizen and all the things he's done for the community, which obviously doesn't matter anymore. But clearly, whether the lawyer's requests were granted or the judge had some other reason for coming to this conclusion, a lot of people are not happy with it. It's well known that people facing this charge are at a higher chance of being a flight risk and also have a higher chance to reoffend. So, I mean, I understand why the family is as upset as they are, because they are now living in a state of constant concern and worry for their own well-beings, given what Dan has done. And not only for their own well-beings, but also for any evidence that Dan could possibly destroy now that police could have found and used against him whenever his court proceedings do come to pass. But in exchange for his release, Dan has had to give up his passport, he's had to give up all his firearms, and he is being monitored via GPS 24/7. He's only allowed to leave his house for specific appointments as well, but to many people this still is not good enough. Brent's family has started a change.org petition, and I'll link it down below if you want to go sign it. It basically, in essence, is to fight against the decision that the judge has made to release Dan on bond. Brent's children have also filed a wrongful death suit against Dan and plan to hold him accountable in any way that they can, which I don't blame them for. It's still hard to think about that there are people in the world who actually think that they have the end-all be-all decision-making power to determine if someone can live or can't live. And clearly that's exactly how Dan felt, and he felt like he could get away with it. I say this in a lot of my videos, but I was really shocked when I saw this case and hadn't heard of it when it was actually happening in real time. We all know how this trend goes of some stories being covered and some not. So I am happy that I was able to tell Brent's story, but this one is just... I just wonder what makes people think they can actually get away with doing things like this. This is not the 1800s where camera footage and DNA were not a thing. And he really thought that he could get away with it, even with this man working for his company for years, and even with the paper trail of him having to report to the authorities of what jobs he's working on. But it's just scary to think about, because there was actually someone who did an interview with a news station who knew Dan and said this is not in his character, and I'm not gonna perpetuate that message, but I'm just telling you guys so that you can have an understanding. Like, Brent probably had no reason to suspect that Dan was gonna do something like this to him, but he did, and it's just like, it's crazy. But yeah, that's all that I have for you guys. I really hope you guys are having a great holiday season. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know what I'm gonna say, if you made it this far, you are loyal, you really are, and I appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening, depending on what time it is when you watch this video. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.